Hello, everyone, and welcome to my presentation entitled Economic Impacts on the Micro and Macro Economy. We will begin today with a discussion on taxes and tariffs, move on to some possible impacts of economic impacts of generative AI, and finish with looking at decision making through the scope of behavioral economics. Now, first, consumer and producer welfare refers to the satisfaction experienced when the consumer paid less than they were willing to spend, or a producer received more than they were willing to accept. This welfare is made up of consumer and producer surplus. The addition of a tax will reduce both consumer and producer surplus, some of the remainder being reclaimed as government revenue, and the rest becoming a dead weight loss. As we can see from the graphs, when the consumption tax is added, the demand curve shifts to the left, and the price equilibrium increases as the tax burden is split between the suppliers and the consumers. Looking at the second graph, we see that the consumer surplus is replaced with some government revenue and some deadweight loss. The deadweight loss represents reduced efficiency in the market and reflects, in this instance, the lost consumer and producer welfare. Moving on to tariffs. A tariff is placed on imported international goods. In an open domestic market, cheaper imported goods can enter the market, undercut local producers, and limit producer surplus. This can be seen in the first graph here. The second graph. Looking at this second graph, a tariff can be introduced which will raise the price on imported goods, which you see here, making local goods more attractive. This will increase local producer surplus while decreasing international producer and consumer surplus. The tariff, like a tax, will produce government revenue and deadweight loss. However, you can see the deadweight loss is in a different position in this graph compared to the local tax deadweight loss. Tariffs are designed to make local producers more competitive, which is why the deadweight loss comes at the expense of the consumer surplus and international supplier surplus, not the local producer surplus. Compared to local tax, we see that a tariff will actually increase local producer surplus if it has the intended effect. Moving to generative AI. As you know, generative AI and its integration into the business world has been increasing in recent years. So it is important to examine the impacts it could have on the labour market, specifically its impacts on equality. We must determine whether incoming AI technology will replace the worker in the market or enhance the output of the worker in the market. This will determine its impact on equality. To explain this, we can graph the impact on the overall labour market just here. First, let's look at what happens when AI increases inequality. Incoming AI will replace workers in a particular market. This will cause a shift of the labour demand curve to the left, creating this second equilibrium point here. The shift will result in reduced wages for workers in this industry and increase inequality. Now, if incoming AI were to enhance the worker's output rather than replace the worker, this will increase demand for labour in this market and cause a rightward shift of the demand curve. This shift will result in increased wages for the worker, we see here as it increases up, and more equality as a result. Clearly, there will be differences for each specific occupation. Moving forward. As generative AI is integrated across many industries, we can expect that there to be an impact at the macroeconomic level. It is expected to have a positive impact on real GDP and product, but the important question is whether this increased productivity will have a long-term effect on real GDP, or will it only be a temporary shock, increasing in the short run and returning to original levels in the long run. If we look at both scenarios graphically, we can see in this first example, it has only had a temporary shock. In the short run, output increases, which we see here. Employment increases and price levels decrease, which will shift the SRS to the right, short run aggregate supply curve. However, this is only a temporary shock, so the SRAS curve will shift back to the left and return to the original equilibrium point. Therefore, in the long run, output, employment, and price levels remain the same. In the second example, AI boosts productivity long term. This will increase output, decrease price levels, and employment will remain the same. This is illustrated in this graph by showing both the short-run aggregate supply and long-run aggregate supply curves shift to the right. The SRAS will shift first, and then the LRAS will follow and create a new equilibrium point for the economy here. Moving on to behavioral economics. Lastly, we're using the scope of behavioral economics. We will examine why someone would choose an unhealthy food option, even if we would prefer change and have enacted change. Basic economics assumes that all humans behave entirely rational when making decisions. However, this is a flawed assumption, as humans are emotional creatures and human psychology interacts with rational thought during the decision-making process. Instead, we refer to bounded rationality. Bounded rationality states that humans make decisions based on the information they have available and are limited by factors like cognitive limitations, time limits, and availability of information. Therefore, we end up using rules of thumb or unconscious bias when making decisions. One type of bias is called the status quo bias. This refers to the drive to maintain a current choice, even when the change would be preferred. Humans enjoy routine and can dislike change, so it is only natural that this status quo bias exists, which would explain why people, when given the option, will keep selecting the unhealthy food option rather than changing to a healthy choice. To sum up this point, people choose unhealthy food options even when healthy alternatives exist due to limited information availability and the status quo bias. Thanks for listening to my presentation.